This episode of the BeanCast is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you advertise on LinkedIn, you can build lasting relationships with customers that often translate to high-quality leads, website traffic, and higher brand awareness. For a free $100 LinkedIn ad credit, go to linkedin.com/BeanCast. Terms and conditions apply. Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Transcription services provided by transcribeme.com. Visit them on the web at transcribeme.com/BeanCast for up to 25% off. That's transcribeme.com. Episode 518, Incremental Digital. For Monday, October 29th, 2018, it's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob Norm. Thanks for joining us. As difficult as it is for many of us to comprehend, digital transformation continues to baffle much of the business world, leading to tentative and unproductive initiatives. So is it a matter of ripping off the Band-Aid and diving in head first? Tonight we'll discuss. Also, whether we're on the cusp of an international tech backlash, the increasing importance of visual search, social selling today, plus this week's Ad Fail 5. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with the principal of digital production resource company, The Antipodean, Ms. Michelle Excell. Hi, Michelle.
Good afternoon, Bob. It's been a while. Glad to be back.
Yeah, glad that you can make it this week. Now, also joining us, we welcome back the founder of 6 Pixels Group, author, speaker, Mr. Mitch Joel. Hi, Mitch.
You know what I'm going to say. Hey, Bobby. Bob hates that.
You've got a trademark. You got to keep with it.
Yeah, it's like my Ed McMahon, right? Yeah.
Now, next, she's the director of consulting at X-Plane, Ms. Holly Noto. Holly, you've got promoted. This is fantastic.
It is. It's big news. Thank you for having me.
And finally, we have the president of Spark Media Solutions, Mr. David Spark. And Mr. David Spark, you did not get a promotion, I'm sorry to say. You're already the top dog.
I'm already the top banana, so it doesn't really matter.
Well, let's jump right into the topics. And first up, I was reading a piece from McKinsey on digital transformation, and one of their thoughts really stuck with me. That incremental approaches to digital transformation simply don't work. Now, there's a lot to this essay, but essentially digital approaches are so at odds with traditional business processes that only an all-in approach can actually have any kind of effect in the end. So, Holly, do you agree with this premise? Is it suspect because it's a consultancy here saying this, and obviously this is what they trade in, or is this carrying some merit here, this statement?
I have to admit, when I read this, I thought to myself, oh, I'm just going to hate this and disagree with all of it. Not because on principle of McKinsey has pretty good stuff, but I just didn't think I liked the idea that incremental wasn't the way to go. And I read through it. And my first impression was they got a lot of stuff right. From our experience at Explain and my experience working in, companies that have to turn a pretty large ship into the digital environment, they picked up on the stuff that we've picked up on. Mismatch, the business model doesn't fit the digital model. It's going to take a new approach to digital transformation or transformation efforts entirely. It will have to do that. They know things like the inertia that usually you have in a transformation effort is caused by the people who have the most power because it runs afoul with what they are doing and how they got their power. So much of what they had to say in this was right. And I had to admit it. I think where I started to really start to separate myself from their recommended approach was not that I disagreed, I should say, with the idea that you have to, You have to work with executives. You've got to really work through the human side of change, and then you've got to, kind of take the big leap in order to get the big return on digital. I think that's all right. That's correct. But the problem is that it's untenable. It's almost impossible and unlikely at the same time. So where we see
Could
a
you
lot.
back up? What do you mean by untenable and unlikely? What specifically are you referring to?
The size of most organizations that are going through digital change right now is pretty big. So you look at the ones the size of major financial institutions, or you look at large retailers. And for them to work a digital transformation across all their different divisions or functions or even operational groups is really challenging. That's where they're all really running into the inertia and the slowing down right now. And what we're seeing is that they're trying to do it, in these incremental ways. Like, I'm just going to do it in this pocket around this process, or I'm just going to do it around this particular business group. And that's the way most transformation efforts work, is they sort of take themselves through an incremental change. And McKinsey was right to say nobody's really getting the full benefit now of digital transformation because they're doing it in pockets. And we totally agree. I think where I think it's unlikely to happen, or it feels impossible for most organizations, is that they're still trying to do it, and they're still trying to figure out, well, how do I do it all at once? And it's the people side. People don't really love change. They don't love giving up their domains of power or influence or the territory that they've earned over time. So I got to say, while I agree with them, I think it's not going to change. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I mean, the inertia question is really what I took away from this article. It was the big, reveal is that whenever you have inertia with an organization at the top, you're not going to be able to affect change. And incremental approaches just don't really have any lasting impact. It seemed like a no-brainer what they were saying, but at the same time, I take to heart what you're claiming. It's just like that these organizations are so big, the processes and the tasks are so huge that there's no likelihood that anybody's going to go all in and jump in and disrupt their entire business without some kind of incremental approach to it put into play.
But as has been said, and has, whether it's been correctly or incorrectly quoted to Mark Zuckerberg, if you do not disrupt yourself, someone else will. And I cannot stress that enough.
Absolutely
and we
true.
have so much evidence of this. And
No, here's the problem,
being
though.
upended all the time by they digitally transforming, mostly because that's how they start. They don't have anything legacy that's doing it. And entire industries get displaced. And, there's endless evidence of this. So it takes a threat for them to move. And if they don't feel threatened yet, they will be threatened soon enough. And it may be way too late. In fact, I'll go so far to be probably too late that it happens. So they need to realize that the threat is there. And more importantly, and this is the part that I want to stress, because things move digitally, they can move laterally, meaning your next competitor is not even currently in your industry. And that's the thing you really got to be scared about.
So we're seeing something. Oh, I'm so sorry. I was just going to say, to build on that, we're seeing a huge trend of where the biggest and nearest competitors used to be was in the same scale or the same market as you. But what we're seeing now is it has much more to do with when the competitor was born, meaning the born in the cloud. The millennial competitor is the one that started off digital, that already had different business models and literally ways of working across the operating model, so that they weren't functioning like old school hierarchies and functional silos. And that's really where the nearest competitor is coming from. It's not your, it's not your competitor from 20 years ago or 30 years ago. It's the new guy who's getting bigger and was born in the cloud or born in the digital era. And they've already solved for all of those problems of change because they're already there.
I also think that incrementally, businesses, small, medium, and large, B2B or B2C, were really able to approach it more of a band-aid solution because they were building off of these technological infrastructures that they had, IT teams, servers, things like that. But you're right that as we move to the cloud, it becomes this sort of strange friction between legacy systems that we have decades of investment in versus software as service and paying light fees per month, and on the back end, this software is auto updating and doing everything it needs to do to be permanent. Also, you have an ecosystem within that where people are developing on top of it. So I think you can't dismiss speed. Speed is really important. I think it's harder for a startup to really triple, quadruple past an incumbent, especially if they're really, really strongly situated. You see that for sure in the digital space, where it's like the running joke is like, who's really competing with Netflix? Who's really competing with Facebook? Who's really competing with Amazon? And they've sort of built these moats around whatever their business models are and how laterally they move. And I totally agree with David on that. But I think, to me, when I look at it, it feels more like it's legacy versus cloud. It feels more to me that it's, well, we have an internal team and we've invested in this, versus can we do this now externally with all this sort of cloud-based software that's out there and we can work on. And it's funny, if you think about how transformations happen. A lot of people applaud Facebook for a major pivot when they really invested and went all in on mobile. But you could also make the argument, if you were there at that time, and I was, that it was actually quite incremental. I mean, they had made many steps at it until one point where I just think the data was so pure to Zuckerberg and the team that they had to go more full bore. But they actually did approach what many of us see as one of the bigger digital transformations in quite an incremental way, actually, when you look at it. And so, I think you're right, Bob. There is a lot of consultancy rhetoric. I thought it was well written. I didn't sort of jaw drop and go, wow, this is ingeniousical. But I think it downplayed the power of this cloud technology, how light and nimble it just allows every single business to be. It's staggering.
I was surprised by how much I enjoyed this article. I think I had the same reservations, thinking that, okay, they're just going to be spouting their traditional consulting rhetoric, but it touched on so many things that I consult on. It sounds like similar to Holly, and so many things that I've written before, things that I have been sort of screaming at the top of my lungs for the last few years.
So, am I gathering this correctly? Did you like this article because it agreed with you?
I like this article
because that's what I'm hearing.
Somebody else was saying it. And I think that there were a couple of really smart things in here. I think that nobody has been playing up that cross-disciplinary group to avoid fragmentation point enough. I really enjoyed that. That's such a critical part of this. So it can seem insurmountable, but the way that I approach consulting when we're talking about, the new revolution of immersive technology, beyond digital, straight digital, is, where do we start? Well, you start with a pilot, and that's exactly what they're saying in this article as well. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to have the blueprint and then implement it. They're just saying that you need to cut deep, shake the foundations, get buy-in, start with the big picture, get buy-in on that, then go incremental. They're not actually saying don't go incremental. They're just saying don't start in one place isolated from another place isolated from another, because you'll have many wins or fails, and you'll have no knowledge building,
Exactly.
No knowledge sharing and building. And so I really liked that. The cross-disciplinary thing, I think there's definitely something in that. Cut deep, get leads from each discipline. And then this other thing in the article was really great. Looking at those three pillars, the financial risks of not evolving, the financial opportunities of evolving, and looking at current waste. And that's the hardest thing.
How much of
waste is always the hardest.
How much of this is just choosing the right increment to make first? Because again and again, from what I'm hearing from this conversation, it comes down to communication, and that the organization is sharing and learning from each other and growing together towards some kind of digital future. And for me, that seems like the first planned digital incremental step that any organization needs to take, is to improve the digital communications within the organization first, and then start the outward-facing digitization of processes.
Looking internal is a really great way of looking at it. I've actually heard a lot of chatter from friends recently who have left companies that seemingly on the outside are evolved digitally, certainly make incredible digital products, and even immersive technology products, and big in the IoT and AI space and all the rest of it. they're leaving because outwardly everyone's telling them what an amazing company they work for, and inwardly they're still dealing with legacy process. And so I think that starting internal is an amazing way. And often if you can identify and work on a pilot that's for internal process first before you take that step outside, that's a great way for everyone to learn.
And I think
so I like that.
And I think it's a great way to reduce risk. I mean, one of the things we wanted to cover on this topic was, what are the risks that you need to focus on, or how do you manage the risk? And I think when you take a pilot program or approach and you start internally, you run into all the bumps and jumps that you're going to hit along the way, but you're not doing it out in public. You're learning it internally and you're teaching it internally. And that's one of the first pieces of information, or advice, I should say, that we tend to lean towards, which is, can you do this in a way that teaches you a lot, teaches you this much in a short space of time, and gets you a lot of return that you can then go apply more broadly or more externally? So I'm with Michelle. I surprised myself by really agreeing with so much of the principles that were talked about here. And it was refreshing, because I wanted to say that it was consultant speak, but it was actually really well-formed advice.
What's funny is, if I sort of listen to the conversation we're having, it's swayed away from the idea of the article, which is go big or go home. And when we're talking about bringing it in internally, doing tests, but
Well, I
really the
think
crux of it was go big or go home.
Their point
The article does say
their
that
point is
as well.
clear.
Yeah.
Their point is clear that that you really can't have a digital transformation in increments, that you need to embrace it fully before you truly get the benefits. But I don't think that the article necessarily was saying, and maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think it was saying that you need to go big or go home, as much as it was saying that you need to start embracing this digital transformation into every aspect of your company before you're going to start seeing success. And I think it's more about mitigating expectations rather than saying that you're supposed to be going all in and blow up your entire company.
And Bob, that takes a much deeper issue and when you guys were talking about communication, it's about a culture issue. Is this an organization that embraces the need to innovate for essentially company survival, the need to understand what competition is out there in your current space and who could move laterally, because other organizations, like, what are the organizations that have gone digital, that have the money, that could conceivably infiltrate us? Who would have thought Amazon would all of a sudden be a competitor to cable? Well, cable should have known that, because all they would have to do is look at who are the organizations that are most digital right now. And that's what you need to look at. Who are the organizations that are most digital, that essentially moving laterally into our business would be a snap for them? And it was. I mean,
well,
relatively speaking, versus trying to launch an entire cable network, for that matter.
One of the things that I noticed that a lot of businesses do, and maybe the group can comment on this, is instead of just blowing up all processes within the organization, they start a business unit that is completely digital, and they allow it to grow, and they nurture it, and they make it so that it, either by osmosis or by Darwinism, that that pilot organization or that pilot unit within the bigger organization can affect change. Is that something that you see being a very successful tactic, Holly, or is that something that is just a showpiece for a lot of companies to say, hey, we're digital?
I think it depends on how you do it. If you're truly doing it to gain the benefit or to create some efficiencies of scale later on, so that you can then lift it out and apply it in the adjacent either processes or products that you have, great. That's a great idea. Because if you really have the full intent to use it as a pilot and then go through a distribution model or an adjacency model where it starts to just spread across the company using what you learn, great. But you want to avoid that sense of a spin out. Oh, we spun this group out. And then they become a bit too isolated from the rest of the organization, and they become those people who do things differently. And that's where you risk the most, I think, loss in terms of your return on that investment. Because I think, David, you said it, it's a cultural issue. You want to make sure that you're not so far apart or so separated from the rest of the organization that the cultural lessons learned and the ways of working get lost in that sort of being put in your own little microcosm. So there's a risk. You got to have a plan to transfer. You got to have a plan to grow and evolve and have it touch everything that's adjacent to it in a very strategically planned out way. If you don't do that, if you sort of run it on a let's see what happens basis, you're not going to get a lot of transfer back into the larger organization.
And I think one approach for doing it, rather than calling it a digital team or even a digital transformation team, is calling it an integration team. So there aren't many departments within any company that really see things end to end, fully holistically. And that's one of the reasons I think that digital transformation or digital adoption in general has a hard time, because digital inherently is a lot more integrated, I think, personally speaking, and I'm talking about within an advertising or marketing company. But what I found is having some people who, I like the idea of an external team or task force or whatever it might be, but it should, I think it's calling it integration is maybe a less alarming word to call it, or something like that, less typical, because it really is about integration at the end of the day, getting everyone on the same page.
One last thing. I don't think any of us are suggesting that you need to throw out all old processes, that some old processes are actually effective, right, Mitch? I mean, it's just like any kind of digital transformation is not about making the old go away completely. It's more about saying what works, what doesn't, and how can we grow into this new digital future. And this process of evaluation is key to making that transformation.
It's also about what works and how you scale it. I'm thinking about Tom Goodwin from Havas and his infamous sort of quote about, the world's largest car company, owns no cars. It's Uber. The world's largest retailer, Alibaba, owns no stores, and on and on. It's that sort of quote that we never attribute to him, but everyone steals and uses to look smart. And what a lot of people don't know is he updated it in January, saying the largest car company, Uber, actually owns a lot of cars. Now Amazon's the largest retailer, and they own quite a few retail stores, and things change. And I think it's true that as we see scale and dominance happen, it's less about digital transformation and more about understanding where the actual rubber meets the road. And a lot of these businesses that have been around forever, that are there and that are being disrupted, are actually leaders for a reason, and they actually have a very strong model that you can disrupt. But you see Warby Parker opening up retail stores, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, I absolutely believe that it's a world of everything is with, not instead of, and I've said that for decades at this point. And it frustrates me too when there's this sort of general digital transformation is everything whole hog attitude, whether it's coming from a McKinsey or out of my mouth. And it sort of makes me yawn a little bit, because there are very smart businesses who understand their industry, who've done very well at growing through acquisition or organic, and they know what they're doing. And so, yes, this is an imperative. This is a different time. Things are changing. But let's not forget that when customers come into play, whether it's B2B or B2C, sometimes the big beasts in the industry that are being disrupted know something.
Yeah. And on that point, I want to move on to our next topic in just a minute, talking about the global tech backlash that a lot of experts are predicting will come in the wake of GDPR. There's a lot of talk about global populations resisting this tech depersonalization of individuals, but we're going to get to that in just a minute. But first, I got to talk about our sponsor, LinkedIn. Look, if you're going to market your business, a couple of things. It's about reaching the right audience at the right time. That's a basic marketing paradigm. And it's about connecting them with a message that will resonate with them at the exact right time. So if you want to target your customers where they're engaging every day and when they're ready to make a decision, LinkedIn is the perfect place to run your next ad campaign. Because when you advertise on LinkedIn, you're not only getting the world's largest professional network, you're getting the opportunity to build long-term relationships where customers actually feel comfortable. Relationships that translate into high-quality leads, website traffic, higher brand awareness. In fact, over 575 million professionals engage with content on LinkedIn. That's a lot of people. And chances are your future customers are going to be among them. So you're definitely going to want to reach out to this network. And then there's the targeting, because LinkedIn has the marketing tools to help you target your customers with precision. Because unlike a lot of the competitors out there in the social space, you're not just targeting on simple demographics, you're also targeting right down to the job title, to the company name, even the industry. And remember, better targeting equals a message your customers care about, which in turn leads to more trust built with customers. And I got one last fact for you, and I want you to pay attention to this. Keep in mind that 4 out of 5 customers who are on LinkedIn are decision makers at their company. That's 4 out of 5 are decision makers. So you're building relationships with the kind of people who matter most to your business. Now, they've got a great offer. I love this offer because it gives you an opportunity to try out LinkedIn for yourself. You're going to redeem a free $100 LinkedIn ad credit and launch your first campaign. And all you have to do is go to linkedin.com/BeanCast. That's linkedin.com/BeanCast, and you're going to get a free $100 ad credit. Now, terms and conditions do apply. They're all on the website. I want you to check it out. Remember, LinkedIn, absolutely the best place to target your next B2B campaign. And we thank them very much for their support of this show. Well, eMarketer is claiming that GDPR is just the beginning of a global tech backlash that could see country after country enact legislation to sharply curtail tech's ability to expand. David, is this just alarmist thinking, or is this a real possibility that this is actually happening? And there were 2 articles that we were referencing. One was the infamous Wall Street Journal article that it took forever for us to find and get down. But there was also this eMarketer article. Between the 2 of them, what's your take on this situation?
So back up and understand where GDPR comes from. Europe historically has been very pro-privacy. Can't speak about that to the United States, or I can't speak to other countries, but that is Europe's mantra. They are very, very strict about what control companies can monitor of others and even their own employees, okay? So they have a history of being extremely pro-privacy. So the fact that they introduced GDPR, not a surprise. Now, this whole thing about big companies and the way that they're abusing data, I don't think there's really a one-to-one correlation between GDPR and that. That's a whole other issue. The thing with GDPR is it affects everyone, not just the big players. So to mix the two is, I think, kind of an apples and oranges thing. But
let me play devil's advocate for a second.
I think others are taking notice. I mean, here in California, we are having our own privacy legislation that's going to go into effect in 2020, but it actually isn't as stringent as GDPR because ours is more of an opt-out policy of getting out of data collection versus the way GDPR is. You have to have explicit opt-in for a company to actually collect your data. What were you about to say?
Well, what I was going to say is that GDPR may be from a very restrictive, privacy-centric community. I understand that. But it's also in response to repeated violations of those privacy regulations that came before it. So, I mean, you can't say that GDPR did not come about as a result of a lot of bad behavior on the part of tech. And I think that's at the core of what these articles are talking about. There's a lot of bad behavior floating out there, and the comeuppance is just starting. I mean, I'm skeptical of this article. I'm skeptical of this premise that a whole bunch of different nationalities and different communities around the world, populations, are going to rise up and rebel against the privacy concerns that they feel. But it's not so far-fetched, especially considering the fact of something that you said, that GDPR is affecting everybody, and it's awakening people to the reality of how much their data is at risk.
I should mention it's affecting everybody who does any kind of business in Europe or communicates with people in Europe, but that's pretty much everybody in general, I would assume.
But the real crux,
unless you're a very local business here in the U.S.
The real crux here is obviously that Tim Cook from Apple came out, and there's a lot of angles to this story with Tim Cook from Apple, because one of it is, of course, he's taking his swats at Google and Facebook, but it's very hard not to look at society today and realize that you have these multi-billion-dollar platforms where the only product being sold is your data and information, that these are not driven by what many have dubbed the surveillance capitalism. There's a truth here. And it's not about stricter privacy laws in order to restrict people's abilities to do things or take away choice and things like that. It's about the fact that consumers don't really understand or have access to truly understanding what is being done and where it's going. And again, maybe I'm going to show where I come from geographically because I'm Canadian. And so perhaps we do lean more towards these European models. But ultimately, Bob, I think you nailed it. And when you should go down that road a little bit and unpack it, the only reason any of this exists is because we, the marketers, have stepped over the line way too many times, or these tech platforms and companies have stepped over the line way too many times. And the only reason that this is happening is because government has to intervene because we ourselves can't self-regulate. We ourselves can't help ourselves. Oh, we can grab data, let's take that data. Oh, we can sell that data, let's sell that data. So there's that sort of famous data is the new oil flopping around everywhere, but data is being used as a weapon, and it has been completely weaponized. And if there's no way for us to respect human values, to respect people's data, to respect their right to security, and I'm not talking about the right to privacy, the right to security, to have that information, that consumers could have access to this, that it can be done in a transparent way, which is very easy to do in a digital world. I think it's shame on us and shame on the businesses for having to have government.
But shame is not going to control people from doing it. I mean, our data is a product. That's what it is. It's a product that can be used, sold, and resold and targeted. I mean, it's an amazing product that has an insane amount of value to it. And either regulation's going to come in, and with our current president who is very aggressive about deregulation, I don't see how that's going to be done on a federal level. But if you have states like California who control such an enormous amount of economy, they set a regulation. That so goes the nation. I mean, you're just not going to have a
David,
choice.
if that data is valuable, don't you think the value of that data should belong to the person whose data it is?
I agree, but the problem is when you as an organization can gather that data so incredibly easily, it's way too enticing not to take it. I don't disagree with you.
But then we need
the
laws.
thing is, each company is so enticed to take it.
But then there needs to be, but that's the point of all this. GDPR forces these companies to then have another layer to that, which is don't just take it and do whatever you want with it. It has to be understood by the consumer what is being done with it. So you can't say, well, isn't it great? It is great.
But I will tell you, the problem with GDPR is it's not nuanced in any way that you think it is. It is an all or nothing thing. Either I get to collect your data or I don't get to collect your data. And that's the major problem with GDPR is it has zero nuance to it whatsoever.
GDPR is not a perfect... GDPR
that is a problem because there's certain ways you would like your data used and there might be certain ways you don't. And the problem is most people don't control their own privacy. Most people don't go on a Facebook and change their privacy settings. But if you ask them, do you want privacy? Yes, I want privacy.
Well, this is evolving into a conversation that is much broader, and I want to narrow it back down to where we started, which is that GDPR may be imperfect legislation, but it's still the impetus to other legislations being formed around the world. And I think I think California, part of the world, but
but it is ridiculous that it's going that way. I mean, I come from the music industry, and you think about how rights to music is still in this day and age geographic. However, it's a Spotify or an Apple Music, they got to go country by country. We do have a connected internet, and if you have a business that's interacting on the platform globally, there should be a more unified way to do this. I mean, if we're getting down to the state level here, I mean, no one's going to be able to operate.
No, absolutely not. Michelle, I want to get your thoughts on the fact that tech firms are, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, will this situation negatively affect all tech firms or just the ones built on models that ignore privacy and other consumer concerns? I mean, it's just like, it's sounding like the way this conversation is evolving, that everybody loses from restrictive legislation at the same time that everybody wins. So, but it seems to sink all boats.
No, I don't think so at all. I think that it's a wake up call. I think that it's good that we're starting to get regulation. Is it perfect the first time it comes in? It never is. Regulation absolutely never is, but it has started the conversation. Hopefully, it lays it lays the way for more nuanced regulation. That would be great. But to be honest, I mean, I've seen it from day one in web development where you would start working with certain clients and then hand over their database because we'd be migrating them to a new CRM system or something like that, and consumer records wouldn't be encoded, and this is going back a ways. There's been bad habits forming for so long, and I think that we've given people a lot of rope and they've run with it. And I think that it's a really good thing now that they're being pulled back in a little bit. It's going to take a while to get it right, to even get everyone to agree that this is a good thing. But also, we're also now so digital from a consumer point of view. Every single part of our life, our way we communicate, the way we entertain, the way we work, that now we're starting to also realize what happens to our data. I remember when Google Maps first came out, not Google Maps, sorry, Google Analytics. We were using it a long time ago, and even then you could say, hey, do you want to send the data from your site back to Google or not? And we've as people in the industry, we've been aware of all of this stuff for a lot longer than anyone else has. And now you've got lawmakers becoming aware of it, consumers becoming aware of it. This is step one in the right direction. I think I'm not going to comment on whether GDPR is a good good regulation.
Well, but
or not.
that's not the question. The question's not about whether GDPR is a good regulation or not. It's more about the fact that everybody is affected equally harshly by GDPR and will be equally affected harshly by any additional legislation that comes down the line from other nationalities. So
but
that
you
says
we should do it incrementally or not at all?
No, what I'm saying,
company basis.
No, I'm not trying to say that we need to do it better. We obviously do need to do it better. But what I'm more concerned about is, what impetus does it give companies to behave well in that scenario because everybody's being treated equally badly? It's just like for me.
Let me argue. I don't believe it's equal treatment because if you're a company that's heavily invested in Europe and you don't have any control over your current data and you don't know how to reel it in and you're connected to third parties where you don't know what they're doing with the data, then you are greatly affected by GDPR. If you're someone who just has a mailing list and you know where the people are from Europe and you know how to turn them on and off, you're not that heavily affected by GDPR. So there are definitely
that's a great point. That's a great
severely
point.
Companies are affected by this.
That's a fantastic point. Well, I want to move on and I want to talk next about visual search for retail. It's something that we've talked about on this show for a number of years. I think that it's a very important part of the future of retail. Unfortunately, it keeps being touted as coming next year and it never does. So we're going to talk about the status of that in just a minute. But first, a word from AdRoll.
I come downstairs and I overhear my mum and dad talking in our native Farsi that, potentially we might lose our last shop, and we've always had stores growing up. I guess I was just in my own little bubble enjoying my job in music, and I didn't really realize that potentially our house was on the line. We both knew something had to change. I genuinely firmly believed in the digital process, in getting our garments seen online. I knew we needed help, and I knew we needed a platform to help get our content seen and our message heard. The first campaign that we engaged with AdRoll returned 27 times the ROI. I can turn back and say to Dad, look what we've accomplished.
To learn more about how Nav Salimian turned his family business into a global retail brand, visit adroll.com/BeanCast. That's ADROLL.com/BeanCast.
Well, moving on, it's been the holy grail of tech for some time. Visual search promises to let consumers locate items to buy simply by photographing a similar item in their life. Now, companies are expanding efforts and fine-tuning efforts and getting ready for a wave of adoption. The only trouble is, Michelle, demand continues to get bear. I have like a weird word in my script, and it's like totally tripping me up.
Demand continues to not be there.
Yeah, demand continues to have early lackluster results at best. So, are we really on the verge of this new era, or is it still years before a consumer adopts it? What's your take on the situation with visual search with that very lame intro? Sorry.
Roundabout way of saying it. Yeah. First off, holy grail, come on. We should not be using that term anymore for anything tech related. But I'm stoked to be talking about
I will take exception for that for just a second, because it's just like, when I use the term holy grail for visual search, I don't think that it's overstatement. It's not hyperbole. I mean, the ability to take a photograph of anything in your life and then find it immediately online and then buy it is an incredible leap forward that everybody's been promising for a long time, and it never seems to materialize. So I would counter that it truly is one of the few times you can use the word holy grail, the term holy grail, and actually have it apply. But that's just my thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think, is it going to be a holy grail for
Take it up
search?
with the priest, Bob.
Yeah, I've got Monty Python flashbacks.
Sprinkle that holy water.
They were a little too, wearing blinders in that search for the Holy Grail. But I think it is an incredible opportunity and technology that is absolutely coming into play. So I want to reset a little bit, because this is an area I work quite a lot in. So visual search does allow you to use an image to do a computer-based search to find something similar. You can start with an image. You can put it into a search engine. You can start with an image and put it into some sort of search field on a particular company or retailer's site, to start a search, to find similar products, or I think in some of the source material you shared, even to help you find things in store, like, hey, I have this, where are they in Home Depot, and then there's also a lot of stuff that we don't see that's not necessarily active participation visual search. There are some new sites, startups that I really have a soft spot for, folks like C.Fashion. SEE.Fashion. Love those guys a lot, who are working with big fashion retailer sites to implement visual search and computer vision, machine learning, to subtly actually change what you're served up. So if you come from another site, so it's customized for you without you really understanding it so much, just based on visual. And so when we talk about the success, I think, of visual search, and is it there yet? Is it going to come? There's two things that I immediately thought of. One is the capability. Understand, building out these databases, learning what images are, what objects are, categorizing them, understanding what they are. So getting that database built. And also, and we are getting there. So we're building these amazing libraries of things that computers are now understanding. Cats, human faces, couches, things like that. So that really does take a long time to build, and it is getting there. And there's different things that are going to come up in a year or two once all of that sort of converges, different databases. But then there's also the tech that's built into the devices with the cameras. So there's also, if we're taking photos of something, the tech of our devices needs to be up to scratch in order for it to, to take that visual information and understand, or to capture it in such a way that it can then interpret it. So that's one thing, building the tech capability. But then there's the use cases. And this is, I think, what we're more going to focus on today. This is the harder thing, where Google has actually had visual search for years. Every now and then I'll post something on Facebook and say, hey, does anyone know where, these glasses are from? Or did you see the outfit on so-and-so? I wonder what brand it is. And one of my friends who does use visual search will say, hey, just drop it into Google and do a search. And I never do.
I love that. Oh my God. I use visual search like it's going out of style, constantly using it.
Awesome. I love that. And I have some friends who are absolutely in the same boat. But then I often ask people where they get stuff, right? So I'm, where'd you get that jacket? Where'd you get that dress? So a lot of these tools out there, a lot of it's about awareness. And it's also about building new habits. So I think like Pinterest is a really good place, because you're already visually scrapbooking, building from Pinterest, and having them be, sort of like a boon in visual search makes a lot of sense. But there's another side to visual search as well. There's also using objects sites or using your camera, looking at things and getting more information from them. And that's where we're really seeing this convergence with AR as well. So having, looking through your phone at something and having it actually understand what it is you're looking at, interpret, give more information, give you different options, being able to put it in your home, things like that. So the way we search is pretty hardwired into us right now. And everyone searches differently. I pride myself on being a good Googler because I'm pretty good with my metadata, and so different people search different ways. So I think building the tech capability and then looking at the use cases, and then in future, when these things become ubiquitous, when this is built into our tech, I think then you're really going to see how this explodes.
How close are we?
The challenge with this is we're talking not really about visual search and tech. I mean, this is a focus more on retail. And I think what we're actually seeing is that user experience isn't the issue. We know that anybody who engages in visual search on a retail app, it's a lot more intuitive to do because all you got to do is take a picture of what you want and you can see what's going on. But the data and the stats says it, right? 1 billion per month versus hundreds of billions of searches that are happening there. So, big tech is going to spend, retailers are going to spend because the tech is nascent and you got to sort of be a part of it. I think Pinterest's, it's sort of like a destination to see things or a place you put stuff. It isn't the sort of moment in need right now where you're there and you need something and you need access to information. My feeling when I read this article was, I don't think it's ever going to work at retail. I think that voice search is going to leapfrog it by leaps and bounds and super fast. People just say into their device, I need this screwdriver, or I'm looking for this type of smoke detector. Where do I go? But I actually don't think it's going to be the Pinterest play. I think if you look at it, it's going to be shame on Google if they don't, and I don't know if they will or won't, but it's going to be an Amazon.
But that misunderstands what visual search is really, the power for retail is really all about. It's about that happenstance, like, oh wow, that jacket. Let me take a picture of it. Oh,
Correct.
That's where I can get it. It's not about intent of shopping. It's about finding
you're
that
being
item.
Specific to fashion, Bob, right? If you look at the article and the example of Home Depot or other stores where it's a big store, you got a lot of things you need, you don't know where this is, you don't know where that is, that's different than the sort of fashion connecting versus there's a lot of stuff that I need and I want to move through it quickly without sort of texting. And that's why I just feel that you guys are all
thinking very narrow right here. Visual search, there is a literal world of images out there. To think that now all the images that are out there, all the clothing, all the animals, all the objects, buildings, whatever is out there can now be indexed if visual search is up to game, but it's too nascent and we've all kind of had bad experiences with it. Once that is now indexed, now you have a level of power that you've never seen before that goes way beyond just retail. And the fact that a single image could have hundreds, if not thousands of index points in them because of the things that are in the image is extraordinarily powerful that will spread across all industries.
No, we see that for sure for Facebook and Instagram and all. There's no doubt, David, but the focus of this was visual search at retail. So I get the impact of it across the board. There's no doubt. And by the way, you can go back and look at Google projects on this type of initiative where you can sort by visuals, and Adobe's even done stuff like this going back a decade. There's no doubt the impact of visual search is important. The focus on it being at the retail level and how it's going to come together, and having places like Home Depot and others investing a ton of money with seeing very little returns. My feeling is that voice is going to skip visual.
Okay, so that's a very specific use case that you provided, though, the Home Depot one. So that the use case there, if everyone read the article or not, but was, you're in store and you've brought a broken door handle with you, and you're like, where do I find this, or where do I find this tool? I need to buy one, and so you would essentially scan something that you already have, or find it on the site. And then put it through the search, and it will tell you where in the store to find it. That's a great tool, but it's a very niche use case. So it's not like they shouldn't invest in that, but it should be one of a suite of tools.
Maybe it's part of their digital
store.
transformation.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I go back to my original concept. You guys are thinking about very, very linear purchase.
Well, but that's what the article is about. The article is about retail.
What I'm saying is this still bleeds into retail. Retail needs to expand the viewpoint of how it sees retail.
Yes,
That's the
absolutely. And that's why Amazon's move several years ago to start warehousing our photographs for free, quote unquote, for free, is really a big indexing play. I mean, we understand
Amazon
that.
Lens and AWS,
Right.
absolutely, and AMS for sure.
So
Yep.
There are so
Holly,
many other
let me
ways
get
that we can
Holly wanted to
discover
jump in
products
before.
that aren't through the linear process that's been described.
Okay, I have one. So I was actually doing a workshop a couple of weeks ago, and it was for a drill company. The target was 25 to 35-year-old women, and I did one whole section on visual search. So we were looking at it. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here, but just to narrow it down, we were looking at ways that we could use visual search data to create insights and create a site that could be used for inspiration for upcycling or DIY projects based on, things that were trending for sale, things that styles that in your area, things that were trending for sale in shops in your area or on Gumtree, which is like their version of like eBay, I guess Australia's version of eBay. This was for an Australian agency. And so what we narrowed it down to was that could we use these sorts of data insights and visual search insights to create something surprising, something really surprising and useful that somebody wouldn't have thought to search themselves, and also that they probably couldn't search themselves. It would take days, and we would bubble up these surprising insights, all visual based. So rather than searching, we were using it to show. And that might be a way that we start to get more buy-in from consumers and from retailers about this. If we sort of show them what's possible, use it to create really interesting insights, or what to buy next, or new stuff in store, things that might relate to you, and then get them used to seeing things visually and searching that way. I just thought that was a cool way of looking at it.
And Holly, you were trying to jump in before. Did you have anything you wanted to add to this conversation?
This one's intense. I think that it's hard to add anything more than to say from almost personal experience, like taking myself away from my professional work and say, I do think that the way to lead the behavior change is through changing the experience with visuals as a data asset, if that makes sense. So if you can get people to start seeing the photograph or the picture either they take or they find as a link to the thing they buy, you're going to start making a lot of headway. And so I'm just tipping back to what Michelle was just saying, which is give them a new experience of how a picture, how the visual can get them what they want faster.
Yeah,
and I think that that's going to tip them into the new behavior. And then it's going to open up a whole world for everyone from the retailer, like a Target, to the affinity group site like a Pinterest, because Pinterest may be able to then bounce that out to some pretty nice ad marketing sales for them to say, look, yeah, we'll let you tag your stuff anywhere on Pinterest and let people know how much it costs and where to buy it in their area. Brilliant.
It feels like QR codes, right? It's like it's easier and it's smarter, and yet nobody is adopting it.
Well,
It's one of those really strange digital things where these companies, and many people have been talking about it forever. I mean, Amazon had the barcode scanner forever, where you scan the barcode, you can see the prices, and that was the whole showrooming. People are not adopting this. It's mind-blowing. You're taking more pictures than ever with your phone, but when it comes to this stuff, it's like, nah, I'm okay.
This is why I think that visual search will have its, explosive growth in China first. I mean, because it's just like, it's the same thing with QR codes. Like, they do everything by QR code. I mean, it's like
it's a habit. It's a habit forming.
I can't see.
Form the habit. Form the habit, and then you'll have the practice.
But they're trying. It's this weird thing where North Americans are just not doing it. It's wild.
You know what the problem with North Americans is, and I think that this is a little bit tongue in cheek. This is the tongue in the cheek a little bit, but what I have learned by working with some and being embedded in some Asian companies is that there's definitely a sort of value for information and expediency, and also being socially sort of at parity with your peers. So that sort of desire has driven that behavior, where the QR code behavior comes from. But whereas I think in North America, when you start to pull this apart into aggregate, get out of the urban areas and go more to the sort of rural, the suburban areas, most people spend their after work hours just, looking at their Facebook page, clicking through stuff. I know people who actually just like to go, onto Amazon and see what's out there. So it's almost like it's almost like downtime to
But
go
all
look
of that
and
is
shop.
still very image based, and we're taking more
It
and more
is.
pictures with these devices.
Mhm.
We're spending more and more time in that functionality. And yet when it comes to this, we're so resilient.
So I think there's stuff out there that we should be paying attention to, like home improvement people who go out to a website or an app called House with a Z. And they're out there tagging every single product and every picture. It's like a Pinterest for home improvement people or designers. Like they're going out there tagging everything with a price tag and where you can get it. And people who do that for any amount of time become a little bit addicted to clicking on the price tag. And I think if you can start to drive that behavior away from my website is like my magazine, I'm just going to flip through and just see if anything piques my interest. If you can flip into that, you're going to be going into a new behavior.
Well, I want to move on to our last topic because we're running out of time. In the same vein as the whole visual search thing, social shopping is also claiming to be a thing after many previous false starts. Everybody's always claimed that people would want to buy stuff from Twitter. I haven't seen that actually happen. So, Mitch, are we any closer? I mean, is the whole Facebook marketplace a truly watershed moment? Is Pinterest really driving this forward? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I don't think any of that's true. In fact, if you really dig into the research that belies this conversation piece, it's less about social shopping and much more about the fact that mobile and people shopping on the go is facilitating perhaps this growth in social. And I think that there's a big disconnect between this idea of sort of mobile and e-commerce, or what we would call the endless aisle, to this sort of shifting of really what social shopping is about, which is what I would call the anywhere aisle. The fact that, if you want to buy something from, let's go back to Home Depot, in theory, you should be able to buy it off of their Facebook page, off of their YouTube channel, or off of Instagram. And I think this idea for brands, this idea of e-com versus off-site shopping is still very uncomfortable. And I think on the other side, if you look at the platforms, whether it's your Facebook, Instagrams, YouTubes of the world, I think they're really resilient to the idea. In fact, if one of the things when I do my keynote, I talk about the whole Insta business explosion, where people are building Instagram businesses on Instagram without their permission. They're using WhatsApp in the description line so that you can WhatsApp them for the price of what they're seeing in the pictures or videos or tiles. They're using Square, PayPal for the transaction, and Instagram really has no shoppability to it at all. I mean, think about, even a Facebook store versus the buy button. It doesn't even come close. I mean, the closest we're seeing right now is how Facebook Messenger is trying somewhat to compete with the more mature markets in the sort of messaging and commerce activation space. Again, going back to Asia with WeChat and Line, where I think it's 35,000+ merchants in there can accept payments through Facebook Messenger, so you don't have to leave that ecosystem. But when you think about it, it doesn't really feel like it's there yet. It feels like it's more of a lead gen tool. It's a place where you can create value on social. You can provide information. You can be a utility. You can provide sales assistant and help. But the actual core transaction, not so much. Now, is it influencing? Do influencers play a huge role in social shopping, getting people yes, talking about it, buzz, but transactional shopping?
See, that's
not so much.
That's exactly my take. That's
one
exactly
of you
my
define
take.
social shopping for me, because
Sure,
I don't
can
understand.
Sure,
if I
it's
clearly
like,
understand what the definition is.
I think the core definition is your ability to finalize a transaction within a social environment. That would be my
Physically
definition.
being
of
within
social
Twitter, being within Facebook, being within LinkedIn, and then the transaction happens there.
Yeah,
having
it's
an e-commerce
basically
functionality built within it. Correct.
Basically, Facebook or Twitter become a retailer as well as a social network, and I think that
we've seen a lot of that, or a little bit of that, through Facebook Messenger. I know they've been sort of pushing that pretty heavily.
But what it really comes down to, and I want to get Holly's thought on this one, because it's just like, it seems like the consumer behavior is that we go to social network for recommendation, like Mitch was saying. We get some kind of message that inspires us to buy, and then we go elsewhere to do the actual shopping. And it seems like that's the behavior that needs to be encouraged, not stopping that process that's natural from happening and just trying to, create the transaction at the moment that they've been inspired to even look for the item.
Well, I think it depends on who you are in the life cycle of the buy. If you're in the social website and you're going to make any kind of percentage on the sale, then I think you want it in your site, which behooves you to create a better user interface and a user experience so that they stay in and don't click out. Versus if you're really just using it like a lead gen machine and you want that sale to come to your site so that you control the buy and you control the financing of the buy, then you definitely want to click out. And I think that it depends on who you are. And I think the decision will ultimately be made by the one who wins where the buy goes and who gets the money for the transaction.
That's the frustration of it, right? It's this idea that everyone talks about, and even your Shopify's this endless aisle, but this anywhere aisle, it's not really uncomfortable. It makes no sense. You think about it, you got billions of people on Instagram, billions of people on Facebook. If they want to transact, let them transact.
Does it not make sense, though, when you think of it in context of what has been going on with direct marketing on television for years? I mean, you basically have this commercial that runs and it gives you a phone number and you buy right from the TV. I mean, essentially you're buying
from
a
commission, right? So those retailers are paying a commission. So is that the question?
So what I'm getting down to is that, maybe instead of trying to create little shops within the social environment like Facebook Marketplace or some kind of other solution like that, to actually treat themselves like they're some kind of direct marketing opportunity. I mean, it's just like it's another ad play, but it makes a lot more sense within the context of the social experience. Does it
They
not?
kind of are doing that, though. Like if you look at concerts, Bob, whether it's your Ticketmasters of the world, it'll say buy and then you click it, but then you're dumped out, right? Like you're just dumped out back over to Ticketmaster. So they make it look that way, but it isn't actually that way.
Right.
Right.
And that's what Facebook is right now. It's not actually that way.
Right.
Like you're on a site within Facebook browser, whatever.
And it seems like if you want to do,
could they make that leap? I mean, that's a huge leap for them to make to actually
but
be
it's
responsible for that transaction.
But it's the only thing that makes sense for them, doesn't it? I mean, it's just like, as opposed to building their own retail operation, to actually just facilitate the transaction. I mean, I've been saying that for years. I mean, I was one of the big believers in the initial Facebook currency that went belly up. I mean, I believe that, it's a great idea for them to create a transaction, to manage a transaction, and to encourage transactions on their platform, but not to necessarily be the retailer themselves and to take on the whole transaction.
But would we be comfortable with that? I mean,
I think we would. We're giving them
podcast included.
Well, we're giving them everything anyways. I mean, aren't we giving them everything?
We gave them all our personal information. Let's go ahead and give them our credit card number too. They've been tracking me on Facebook. They know what I like, where I live, and they know where my friends vote. They know where I, get my groceries. So why not tell them my credit card number while I'm at it?
I think the dirty little secret of this too, candidly, is attribution. If you think about, multi-channel or omni-channel from the e-commerce standpoint, it's still something that's hotly debated is who do you provide the attribution to? And I think that these e-commerce platforms or retailers or anybody who sells in general and then online is worried that what they might see might scare them, and also the information that, let's say, a Facebook or Google might be able to capture from how responsible for the transaction they are might be a scary piece of data for them to know. And I think that this is social is part of the funnel, but this attribution issue is really something that runs very, very deep and is very sensitive to a lot of these retailers.
Right. Well, so that maybe if they did move more of their buy to it, and then they realized how much they were actually contributing, Facebook did, then they would just hike the prices up.
And Facebook
you wouldn't be able to afford to be there. Yeah.
Well, is there also a risk though, if you're letting your product be sold on Facebook, are you missing the opportunity to have a follow-on sale because on your site you're more adept at marketing something that goes with it? The experience you have on Amazon now is you click on something, you're about to put it in your cart, you scroll down, it says other people who purchased this item have purchased these other two things that go with it, and that's the add-on sale. And are you missing that through a social channel?
Yeah, but that's the same argument of why you should go to the website to buy a Snuggie as opposed to buying a Snuggie from a TV commercial. You're going to buy the Snuggie, one way or another. I mean, it's just like they've got a little bit of both going on.
How many Snuggies have you bought, Bob?
I have not bought.
Today.
I use Snuggies in my NYU presentation all the time. It always gets a good laugh. Well, anyway, it's time for the Ad Fail 5. But before we do that, I do want to take this opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug starting with Michelle Excell. You can find her at theantipodean.us. The link will be on the website, so don't worry about spelling it right now. So tell us, what would you like to promote, Michelle?
I have two things. So I'll do it really quickly. November 12th in New York, Brooklyn, on Eventbrite, look up Rox's, ROX''S, Secret Code book launch. So we've been working with Mara, who's created this incredible book to keep girls in STEAM education, an amazing customizable book. We've built the AR companion app. So I'm going to be out there November 12th. And then November 28th, Palm Springs, at TED Women, I am running a workshop called Augment This. So if you are coming to TED Women, look me up. Also, if you're coming to TED Women, sign up. I would love to have you in the workshop. All about augmented reality.
That's fantastic. So yeah, the link for Michelle's website will be in the show notes. Next up, we have Mitch Joel. You can find him at 6pixels.com. That's the home of the 6 Pixels group and a whole bunch of other stuff, including access to his books and his podcast and all kinds of stuff. So what's in your life there, Mitch? What would you like to promote?
Oh, Bob, I think you just did. If you head over 6pixels.com, you'll see my stupidly long-running blog and podcast of the same name, and it's just a massive content there. So please go check it out.
And I highly recommend it. I've actually been on that show before. Next up,
You have indeed.
Next up, we have Holly Noto. You can find her at explain.com. That's explain. Tell us what's going on in your world, Holly. What would you like to promote?
Well, Explain is really excited because we're about to launch our newest piece that we think is going to influence the way that everybody works. It's called Organizational Adulting. Yes, I said adulting, meaning learning to behave like adults to other adults with other adults at work. It's our Ways of Working campaign this year, and we're about to launch a series of conversations both on LinkedIn and on our website. That will be going off November 1st, and be a part of it because it culminates the first week of December with a webinar on how you can adult better at work. And this is a lot of transformational work around behavior change and culture in the workplace.
You might need that if you do your digital transformation.
You're definitely going to need us.
And last but not least, we have David Spark. You can find him at sparkmediasolutions.com. Man, you do amazing content, David. Everything from books to video to audio. So tell us, what would you like to promote?
Well, thank you very much, Bob. I, too, would like to promote two things. One is I'm very excited about it, and it's only been live for about a month. I have a new site, and it's specifically anyone who's in the security industry, cybersecurity in particular. Check out CISOseries.com, and CISO stands for Chief Information Security Officer. I have a series of videos, articles, and I have a podcast, which I co-host with the Chief Information Security Officer of Lyft, Mike Johnson. And in fact, we're going to be recording right after this one. That's become rather successful in the security industry. So CISOseries.com, subscribe to that podcast. And then secondly, any listeners in Southern California or going to be in Southern California next week in San Diego or Los Angeles, I have a new workshop that I do called Business Networking Pickup Lines. And you can actually learn the art of business flirting. There is such a thing. And it's not something where you sit down and you listen to me talk. Everyone's up, talking, engaging. It's a full-blown workshop. No one sits down at all. And it's a lot of fun. And it's a part of a half-day conference that Zoho is putting on about humor and sales. So please join us for that.
And I know that you've got that show coming up right after, so if you need to drop off, I understand, but I hope you can stick around for the ad.
No, I'm here.
Okay, fantastic. And as for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find out how to consult with me. You can even find out how to advertise on the program, so check it all out at thebeancast.com. And don't forget, we now have transcription services thanks to transcribeme.com. If you go to transcribeme.com/BeanCast, you can get a fabulous discount off of your first transcription service, so check it out at transcribeme.com/BeanCast. And now it's time for the Ad Fail 5, a rundown of the lowest moments in advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. First up, a highly sophisticated ad fraud plot has been uncovered by BuzzFeed, Michelle. Apparently, the scammers acquired dozens of Android apps that were popular and well regarded, but not particularly successful. managed to acquire all these apps, then scan the user behavior, and then created bot traffic to mimic that behavior, defrauding advertisers of literally hundreds of millions of dollars at this point. So
genius.
It's it's almost like I gotta say, mad props for the bad guys here. This is really
pretty much. Yeah.
Create a rule and somebody will find the loophole to jump through it, right?
Well, just the technical, undertaking itself was remarkable. Yeah, I was pretty impressed. Yeah.
Now, next up, Vice News successfully proved that Facebook's new system for verifying political ads, David, simply doesn't work after they managed to post ads in the name of Mike Pence, Tom Perez, and even some ads from ISIS. This one's kind of damning when it comes to actual, all the things Facebook's been saying about how they've improved the system.
Well, this goes to be extremely wary when someone says we are 100% secure or we've 100% fixed this problem. That is your BS and warning lights should go off immensely, and it is not a shock that this was discovered.
Yep, absolutely. Now I'm going to go to the Canadian for this next one because it's probably the safest person to put this with. The Trump campaign neglected to stop an email blast that derided CNN only 2 hours after the pipe bomb scare where CNN was mailed a pipe bomb by a Trump supporter. So, I think this is just par for the course for the Trump administration at this point.
What do we say? Make fake news great again? Or what? I'm not sure.
At least get rid of CNN is what they're saying.
Yeah.
Kleenex will rebrand its man-sized tissues, Holly, after consumers complain that the name was sexist. They're calling it extra large now.
You're going to have to be man-size worthy now, Bob. It's like Sponge-worthy from Seinfeld.
The worst part about this name is that it just has so much innuendo there. And it's just like, it's such a terrible, terrible name. Even beyond the sexism.
Oh, I can't decide what's more upsetting. Is it that the name is really just wrong, or is it that this is now something like naming tissue is as important as talking about, I don't know, like transgender rights or women's equity in pay or anything that we're doing in the workplace now, and talking about what happened with the Supreme Court? Like, if we really want to talk about sexism, could we please not talk about poorly named Kleenex? I mean, let's talk about something else. The fact that this was even a problem is really a little embarrassing for most of us who want to have a more important conversation about, sexism and issues for women.
Well, at least it was the Brits who take the heat on this one. It was the Brits version.
It is. And I have to say, I did chuckle because all I could think of was the previous BeanCast we did. We talked about condoms. So that made me laugh.
And she went there. Okay. And last but not least, NBC's Megyn Kelly Today was canceled after the host defended blackface, Michelle, as acceptable for Halloween. And yes, the panel discussing the issue was all Caucasian. I mean, what was your first clue that maybe this conversation should not be happening?
Panel.
Oh, believe me, I am very, very aware of that. I'm very aware of that. But it's just like, we're not talking about the benefits of blackface. We're talking about the fact that whether or not this is like a smart conversation to even be having.
No, I'm always astounded by the conversations that end up actually playing out in, morning TV, daytime TV. But for this, how you could just not have that programmed into your head already is surprising.
I think anytime
it was shocking. Yeah.
Anytime that alarm goes off in your brain where you say something like, what's wrong with, take a pause. Just before it comes out, take that pause.
Well, have something to add to this list or just want to discuss it? Comment online. Use the hashtag AdFail5. That's pound, AdFail, and the number 5. And that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an iTunes listener, we've also provided a direct link to the iTunes Music Store, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory of iTunes. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment, have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
You know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. Just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, you know, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly. It's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Cool beans.